Hey there, I'm Josh, and this week I'm going to be just joshing around building Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. For this hammer, like a lot of other projects I do, I decided to make it out of wood. For the hammerhead, I'm using basswood. I cut 3 pieces of equal length and width, and then I attempted to use a powered hand planer to smooth the surfaces. This did not work well for me, so I switched over to the tried and true belt sander. After I was more or less satisfied with the surface smoothness, I applied wood glue to all of the interior surfaces. Then I clamped them together, and clamped them some more, and clamped them some more. That's still not quite enough. Oh, that's better. After allowing more than sufficient dry time, I removed all of the clamps and went to work smoothing all of the exterior surfaces, by once again using the belt sander. For all 4 of the lateral corners, I cut 45-degree bevels. Then, after adjusting the blade on the table saw, I cut 30-degree bevels into all 8 of the end corners. Once all those cuts were complete, I used the belt sander to smooth them all up. I paid careful attention while doing this to ensure consistent size, shape, and angles on all surfaces. Once sanding was complete, I went to work on cutting down a piece of scrap into the exposed upper circle of the hammerhead. This is where the inscribed runes will be located. After the disc was all shaped and sanded smooth, I found the correct placement on the top of the hammerhead and attached it into place using some wood glue and some brad nails. Once the glue was dry, I went to work on spreading wood filler all over the hammerhead. I tried to keep the coat as consistently thin as I could, because I actually did learn my lesson from previously building both the Trident and the Stormbreaker. Refraining from applying too thick of a coat helps to ensure that the filler will resist any shrinkage or cracking. I then used the palm sander to remove any excess and smooth out all of the rough surfaces. I was pretty happy with how this was turning out so far. Next up, this part was kind of a pain in the butt. To be honest, I probably could have made this easier on myself and printed out a template to transfer the design onto the block. However, I wanted to try it freehand. So once I got the one design all carved into it, I did the old Indiana Jones trick and transferred that design using some paper, in this case tape, and a crayon. There's nothing too complex about it. After it was carved, I just applied the tape and then rubbed the crayon over that, then transferred that piece onto another one, outlined all of those to imprint the design on the bare face, and then rubbed it with a crayon once again. Upon very close scrutiny, you'd be able to tell that all these designs don't exactly match, but they're pretty close. And for my purposes, they're just fine. I had actually briefly considered printing all of these designs on the 3D printer. However, I ultimately decided against that, because I wanted all of the work performed on this hammer to be done by hand. Here you can see my first attempt at writing down all of the runes. Again, this part probably would have been easier if I would have printed out a template and then transferred the designs onto it. But once again, I wanted to do it all by hand. For my second attempt, I divided the circle into equal sections, and then tried to group all of those runes in their appropriate sections. This worked out much better than the first attempt. Here's a fun fact: I never actually verified what these runes translate to. But what it should say is, "Whoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." If this is incorrect and I'm inadvertently putting a curse on all of you who are now watching, I apologize. If I somehow accidentally summoned a demon, I also apologize. Or if I maybe somehow opened a portal and sent myself spiraling through time back to medieval England to fight an army of Deadites, don't worry about me, I'll be back. Anywho, now that I have all the runes inscribed, What I'm doing now is measuring, marking, and then cutting all of the grooves on the sides and the bottom of the hammer. I was able to find a lot of source pictures of this hammer, and that made this entire build a lot easier. Some of the information that I found included measurements for these grooves, but for them, along with all of the other measurements, I actually modified them a bit and used my own, just trying to get it as visually close to the movie prop as possible. Speaking of movie props, the actual design for Mjolnir changes from film to film. Most of the designs are very close in nature, but there are some slight variations. But that actually works out better for me, because that means I don't have to match any one of those exactly. However, if I had to pick one, I'd say that mine probably most closely resembles the one that we see in Endgame. What you're seeing here are some action shots that my son filmed while I was painting. And he actually did a really good job holding the camera nice and steady. You just wouldn't know it because I had to speed it up so much. If you hadn't noticed by now, I split this video up into sections. That first section was all about how I did the hammerhead, and this one is all about the handle. In reality, I did all of the work simultaneously, frequently switching back and forth between the two. However, I decided to split it up into sections because I thought the video would flow better. What you're seeing right now is my homemade lathe. I actually used that technique before when I made the Keyblade a few months back. The idea was to try to reduce the diameter of the dowel rod, and then to install these trim rings, which consist of 1-inch PVC couplers. I wasn't having the best of luck with shaping them, so I tried a different approach. I used this cheap toaster oven to heat up each coupler piece. After it was heated briefly, I slid it onto the shaft and then shaped it. I then repeated that process 9 more times. I'm not sure exactly what temperature you're supposed to heat PVC up to make it pliable, but I found that the toast setting works really well. Once the rings were roughly shaped, I refined them, then painted them, and then installed them. If you're wondering why this past section of the video moved along really quickly, I'll explain it here in a moment. Once I got that revision of the handle done, I wasn't really happy with how it turned out. I felt that those trim rings were too thick, and that the handle was looking really tacky. So I decided to drastically change my approach. Hence the title, The Hammer Handle, Revision 2. For this design, I decided that I was going to carve all of those rings into the handle. So, after equally spacing and marking each ring, I got to work on carving. At first, I tried using the Dremel tool. You saw earlier that it worked really well when I used it to carve all of those engravings into the hammer head. But for this part, I actually had better luck using the wood carving chisels. My idea here for carving those rings into the handle was to make it appear that the rings were actually tapering the leather of the handle. And no, I didn't actually wrap the handle with leather, I was just trying to make it appear that way. Between the carving of these rings and those engravings on the hammerhead, I'm not sure which one was harder, but holy crap, they were both pretty tough. And needless to say, my hands were pretty sore afterwards. I forgot to mention before that this dowel rod is actually poplar. If it was made of oak, there is no way I would have tried that. I also forgot to mention before, but for each application of spray paint throughout this entire project, I applied 2 coats of the gray primer with a light sanding in between coats, and then 2 coats of the desired color, again with a light sanding. And for these trim rings, I'm using Tester's Model Master Metallic Silver, with which I always get good results. Next up, I cut a scrap piece of basswood that will actually sit on the hilt of the handle and house the leather strap. I used a 1 3/8 inch Forstner bit to hollow out the piece. Once that was done, I went to work on shaping it. I wanted this piece to be round with a slight taper. And since this is basswood, it shapes really easily using the sander. I then marked and cut the grooves that I wanted to remove. And then once again used the belt sander to shape it. After I got it down to roughly its final shape and size, I switched to hand sanding it to further refine it. Next, I cut out the end cap, and then repeated the process of sanding it and shaping it. I attempted to use the scroll saw to cut a groove around the circumference, but that wasn't working very well, so I switched over to using the carving chisels. As you can see here, the shape that I was going for was that of an Oreo. Or if that gets copyrighted, then Hydrox. Or if that gets copyrighted for some reason, the generic sandwich cookie. Anywho, now I'm drawing a design onto this hilt piece. I'm trying to closely match the design to that of the movie prop. The idea here is that all of the penciled in area of the main design will be raised while all of the material surrounding it will be slightly removed. Like that. Side note, I've found that using very fine steel wool to sand around all of those intricate designs works quite well for paint prep. Next up, I made the leather strap for the handle. I did this by using one of my wife's very old belts that she bought from Goodwill for like $1. I cut it down to its rough shape and size and then lightly sanded it. To attach the strap, I drilled a pilot hole into the end of the handle, and then used a lag screw with a fender washer to secure it into place. Then I removed it and soaked it in brown shoe polish. And now it's time to put it all together. I once again used that 1 3/8 inch Forstner bit to very carefully drill a plumb hole in the exact center of the hammerhead. And you can see on the end of the handle there, I actually cut a little groove. The reason for this was to allow air to escape. This is something that I learned from when I built Stormbreaker. Oh, whoops, forgot that I couldn't move it once I got it assembled. That was actually kind of a pain. I had to have my wife come down and move it for me because apparently she's worthy. Once the handle was firmly in place, then I attached that ornamental hilt piece before reattaching the completed strap. The combination of that lag screw and the fender washer really helped to ensure that the strap won't come loose from handling. And for that cap on top, I recessed an area for the head of the lag screw and installed a magnet to hold it into place. The idea there being that I could access that lag screw to remove the strap in case it ever gets broken or ripped. For weathering, I am applying my normal mixture of black shoe polish and powdered graphite. No big surprises there. However, it did take some trial and error for this finish. In some areas, I applied the weathering mixture 3 different times and lightly removed most of the excess. Once all of the weathering was complete, so was the hammer. I've got to be honest, I was very, very nervous about this project. However, now that it's done, this may be my favorite thing that I've made so far. I love how this thing looks and feels. And even though it's far from perfect, those blemishes and imperfections are just, in my opinion, a little bit of added character. And I certainly love seeing it hang on my wall next to this guy.
You know, I've got to admit, I'm quite happy with how this hammer turned out. He did quite a fine job, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I agree. I believe he did a fantastic job. America thanks you.
No, give me that. You get the little one.
Sure, no problem.
Yes, that's better. Oh, yes.
You know, there was a time I couldn't lift this. Just kidding. Captain America has always been worthy.
Well, as always, we hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to like and subscribe below, and share it with someone. And if you're interested, please be sure to check out any videos that are going to pop up next to my head. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.
You know, I think I'll give this to your girlfriend.
What?
Nothing. We've gotta go. Avengers! Excuse me. Avengers! Assemble.
Nerd.